In the heart of a vast and desolate forest, there was a village known as Veradis, isolated from the outside world. The villagers were hard-working, simple people who lived off the land, but their lives were governed by fear, fear of the mountain that loomed beyond the trees. The mountain was said to be cursed, home to a terrible creature known as the Devourer, a monster whose hunger knew no bounds and whose cruelty was unparalleled. No one had ever returned from the mountain, and so the villagers accepted their small, quiet lives, never venturing beyond the safety of the forest. Among them lived a young man named Elias, a restless soul with an insatiable curiosity. He had grown up hearing the legends of the mountain, the warnings passed down from generation to generation, but something inside him refused to accept a life lived in fear. The village elders had always told him to be content with what he had, that the world outside was dangerous and filled with unknowns, but Elias felt stifled, as if the walls of the village were closing in on him. He longed for something more, something beyond the monotonous rhythms of his daily life. One autumn evening, as the sun bled red across the sky and the trees whispered secrets in the wind, Elias made a decision. He would climb the mountain, face whatever darkness lived there, and return. It wasn't just the thrill of the unknown that drove him. It was the belief that by confronting this fear, he would discover something about himself, something the village life had never given him. He packed his belongings, ignoring the pleas of his friends and family to stay. "You don't need to prove anything," they said. "There's nothing for you up there but death." But Elias didn't listen. With a steely resolve, he set off into the forest, the mountain rising before him like a blackened monument of dread. The journey was grueling, and as night fell, the temperature plummeted. The once familiar sounds of the forest faded, replaced by an eerie silence that gnawed at his nerves. Yet he pressed on, his heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. As he ascended, the path became steeper, the air thinner, and a heavy fog settled around him. Hours turned to days, and the mountain seemed endless. It was then, deep within the winding trails and jagged cliffs, that Elias first felt the presence. It was subtle at first, a shadow that seemed to move at the corner of his vision, a soft rustling behind him, as if something was always watching. Then, on the third night, he saw it. The Devourer was not what he expected. It wasn't a grotesque beast or a terrifying creature of myth. No, it was something far worse. It was a mirror, a twisted reflection of himself standing in the fog, watching him with cold, hollow eyes. The thing grinned, its lips curling into a sickening smile, as if it knew every fear, every doubt that lived within Elias. "You came looking for me?" the reflection said, its voice a low, mocking hiss. "Or perhaps you came looking for yourself?" Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What are you?" he asked, his voice trembling despite himself. "I am your hunger," the reflection whispered. "I am your fear. I am everything you've buried deep inside, everything you've tried to deny, and now I will devour you just as I have devoured everyone who came before you." For a moment, Elias faltered. He could feel the weight of the reflection's words, the truth in them. All his life he had chased after something, a sense of purpose, an escape from the mundane, but in doing so he had ignored the truth of who he was. He had been running from himself, from the fear of being ordinary, from the uncertainty of what his life meant, but now, face to face with this dark mirror of his soul, Elias made a choice. He would not run any longer. "No," Elias said, standing taller, "you are not me. You're only a part of me, the part that doubts, the part that fears, but I am more than that." The Devourer's smile faded, its eyes narrowing in frustration. "You think you can conquer me?" it spat. "No one ever has." "I don't need to conquer you," Elias said quietly. "I need to accept you." And with those words, something shifted. The reflection's form wavered, its edges blurring, as if the power it held over him was beginning to unravel. Elias stepped forward, reaching out a hand, not to fight, but to embrace. He touched the reflection, and in that moment, he understood. The Devourer wasn't a monster waiting on the mountain. It was the fear of failure, the fear of not living up to expectations, the fear of never finding meaning. It was the part of every person that holds them back, that keeps them from growing. As Elias accepted this part of himself, the reflection dissolved into mist, vanishing into the cold night air. The mountain, once ominous and foreboding, now seemed smaller, less daunting. Elias had found what he was searching for, not some great adventure, not a monstrous foe, but the understanding that to truly grow one must face their own darkness not by defeating it, but by acknowledging it as part of who they are. He returned to the village a changed man, not because he had conquered a great evil, but because he had faced the truth of himself. The villagers asked him what he had found on the mountain, and Elias simply smiled. "I found myself," he said, and from that day on, Elias lived without fear. He knew now that the only thing standing between him and his dreams was the fear he carried within. And by accepting that fear, by making peace with it, he had freed himself to become something greater than he had ever imagined.